Thank you. Up next, as policymakers, we listen to academics, but we also have to listen to practitioners. And up next, we have a great practitioner in development in Michael Lander, who has done many compact developments throughout the state and throughout the upper Midwest even. And he's here to tell us how we can make this easier on him and why he wants to do it. If I can get this open. Yours. Okay.
Here we go. Good afternoon. I've enjoyed the comments of the previous speakers. There's a lot of brain power there about the work we need to do, and I'm only going to hopefully elaborate on that in my comments. I am principally a real estate developer, although because I'm interested in this subject have done a stint as a planner and now a transit advocate as well, and those things all really connect together as we've come to say in the T4A campaign, transportation drives development. When we were talking about the horses or the railroad cars or the river, our development pattern has followed, and we were clearly in the last couple generations working with a automobile-based transportation system. I'm going to introduce the Lander Group, some of our work kind of quickly just to give you a flavor for we do this work on the ground, some of our perspective on that practice based on our experience. I see a lot of progress out there. I started talking to groups in the early 90s about smart growth and new urbanism, and things have changed dramatically on the private sector. Interestingly enough, a little more slowly in the public sector, I think is my perspective, and then talk about some of the opportunities that exist out there, both in the real estate development market, but also for communities in this area. I moved to Minneapolis in 1990 and have done a series of small infill development projects. Actually wanted to start by asking, since it wasn't entirely clear, how many folks in the audience are from outside the 7-county metro? Okay, and how many of you work in government in one form or another? Okay, I'm assuming that's both policy and staff people, but so try to make some comments that are relevant to all of you. But our work has been decidedly in the city in terms of developer development. Since the early 90s, we've been doing small infill development in some of the neighborhoods of Minneapolis and St. Paul, always really focusing on the environment that we're in, the walkability, and a careful attention to the pedestrian that comes and goes from our projects. We've done a combination of renovation work and new construction. Those 3 images are all new construction on the Summit Avenue neighborhood in St. Paul. So we see both new construction fitting in. Many of our old neighborhoods that were developed in the Twin Cities between 1880 and 1920 don't have the housing products that many people look for today. They were primarily large single-family houses, some duplexes, some apartment buildings, but really no evidence of townhouses, lofts, condominiums. So part of our work is adding housing types into the old neighborhoods that didn't exist when they were first built, but very much capitalizing on the tremendous conditions that exist there. In the late 90s, we teamed up with another local developer and began to do some larger projects, this one in downtown St. Paul. And you're going to hear a theme throughout my comments, but this one I think really was the pinnacle for me, 2000. As we said, we've retreated in some areas. This is one of them. In 2000 in St. Paul, the then Mayor Norm Coleman had really aligned a large group of stakeholders in a very community-based process to talk about the future of downtown St. Paul. And it resulted in a notion that this area of St. Paul in the northwest quadrant of downtown would be a mixed-use, primarily residential neighborhood that would have a park at the heart. So this was all laid out in some proactive planning. And when we came along, as John suggested, this is one where they made it easier. There was no planning commission. When we said, we want to do what you guys have envisioned, they said, here's your permit. No planning commission at all. Really did a great job. So that's, I think, what John was talking about when he talks about making it easier. My friend and colleague Bob Ingstrom's in the audience, and when I first met Bob, I'd gone out to the edge to Lake Elmo to see a project he was doing there on a couple hundred acres, and it was beautiful like all of Bob's work, but it was very conventional on large lots. And Bob explained to me that across the road he was going to do an innovative project that's now built, where he was preserving half of the land in permanent open space, constructed wetlands for wastewater, mix of housing types, many of the great ideas that are talked about here. And as I caught up with Bob later to talk about that, he said, yeah, I got that done, but it took twice as long, took twice as much money, and it was twice as risky. That's just the opposite of what John was talking about. We're not going to get better development if it's twice as hard to do. And I'd say that's still very much the situation in our communities. Again, we've done both rehab, that work in downtown St. Paul was both rehab and new construction, and also involved some contemporary design. Just a little plug as a designer, that a lot of the imagery you see in new planning is really wrapped in a very nostalgic kind of image. And one of the things we try to promote is that very new and contemporary housing types, building types, and architecture can exist in these compact communities. We serve really A to Z. At the same time in our practice, we were doing this project down by the Walker Sculpture Garden that served the very highest end of the marketplace. $1 million condominiums, people moving out of the very nicest single-family homes that wanted a really nice condominium. At the very same time, we did this project across town serving an affordable housing market of $150,000 units. And so we work across the board in terms of rental and ownership, in terms of low, medium, and high end, virtually all motivated by the same principles, though, of this compact development. This was a project in Minneapolis on the Midtown Greenway that has been converted to a bikeway across the center of town. Many of you are familiar with it. This is what Ken Greenberg from Toronto calls the retreat of the industrial glacier. Many of our waterfronts and railways, the transportation corridors of the past that have had industry on them, are now in the new era turning to residential and mixed-use development. And this is an example of that. This was the first mixed-use project, or first new housing project on that corridor. And just some images from the interior of that. It's a project where Lake Street meets the Mississippi River. I don't have a lot of good slides of this for today, but one of the things we ran into here as we think about development in Minneapolis, this is on a major east-west corridor, but so many of our corridors, University Avenue that we're planning for light rail now, Lake Street in Minneapolis, pick a corridor. We have said in our comprehensive plans that that's where we're going to have future development. It makes a lot of sense. That's where our transportation is. But our corridors are what I call thin. The distance from the center of the street to a single-family house is 125 feet. And we always get pushback, despite the fact there's a plan in place and many times even some community planning. In this particular site, the neighborhood had come together and said, we want a mixed-use building there. And when we went to propose it, they were very excited, the formal neighborhood group, but it turns out that the 12 or 20 houses immediately next to this site hadn't participated in that process. And so they, of course, thought there was no plan, and this violated all the sensible ideas, and they wrote us a letter and said, we think there should only be 6 houses on this site. So you'll hear as I go through, that is one of the concerns. We work primarily in the Twin Cities. We are working now in Eau Claire, downtown Eau Claire, doing 4 blocks of new development down on the river, again, retreating an industrial use, replacing with mixed use. Did the same thing downtown Des Moines, where we, again, mixed housing types in an urban configuration. My comments are made today really from a broad perspective. I was an easy target this year because I'm almost out of business as a real estate developer. It's a very, very difficult climate, and that's really bad news in a lot of ways. For the subject of today, it's really good news in the sense that change happens in the downtimes. It was very hard to get anybody's attention when they, among my developer colleagues, when they were building as fast as they could sell. In fact, they were building all that stuff we don't want as fast as they could build it. And I couldn't even get their attention because it's, Michael, that's all, that sounds great, but I'm selling this stuff as fast as I can build it. And so now that no one's selling anything, they're coming to conferences like this and more open to a conversation. So this is a unique time, combined with the stimulus and some other things, to get folks to rethink these ideas. So just adding a little levity to it. So it's a little sense of what we've been doing, urban mixed-use work. Our densities typically are 20 to 50 units to the acre. That tends to be the area we work in the Midwest. We don't really do high-rise development per se. There's very few places that makes a lot of sense. But where are we? I think there's increased awareness across the board. It's hard to go anywhere now that people haven't heard about smart growth and aren't talking about these ideas, mixed use, compact, blah, blah, blah. I don't have that a clever caption from The Onion, but the same thing applies here is the statistics are overwhelming. 80, 90% of people believe in this stuff as long as it's not next to them. And that is really where we are today. You'd have trouble finding people that weren't supportive of these concepts on the one hand. It would be just the inverse relationship with the people that would support it next to them. And so we're always next to somebody. That's a bit of an issue. So at 30,000 feet, we're all in agreement. This is exactly what we